So in my last video, we thought about the proportions, the structure, and the details, those three stages that you go through when you're first starting out with a portrait. We also considered different angles of the head and how that might influence that proportion or that structure. But we didn't cover the details. It's very tempting, as I said, to launch straight into a portrait without thinking about those first two stages, but get that in place first and get a good working knowledge of it before you get caught up into the features, the individual details. The first one I want to think about, the first feature I want to think about are the eyes. When you're drawing an eye, and particularly a sort of Caucasian eye, let's say, the top lid, if we've got a tear duct in this area here, comes up quite abruptly and is very dark, top lid. There's a big thickness of skin there that casts shadow down onto the eye. And when it reaches that apex, just before the halfway point, it starts to drop away very gradually. The lower lid does the opposite. It's much lighter because it's catching the light. It falls away more gradually and rises more abruptly. It's also a little less curved. If we were to take a line between the tear duct and the corner of the eye there should be more eye above that line than there is below it. The iris sits, if you want the eye to look sort of natural and not shocked or in pain, just cropped by the top lid and slightly cropped by the lower lid. And the pupil sits within that. Now at this stage, it's useful to think about this eyeball that's plugged into the eye socket, because the tone around the eye is really influenced by that sphere that's pushing out against the skin. If we think about where the light's coming from, perhaps it's coming from this top corner here. If we were shading this sphere, we would want to be a bit darker on this side. We'll carry that across the white of the eye. A little bit darker in here. And then emerge into the light as that sphere is pushing out against the skin there. There might also be just a little bit of shadow here under the eye, so the eyelid, perhaps a little bit on the top as well. For the pupil itself, it needs to be really dark as you can get it. But again, you'll have seen artists using the technique where they leave just a little bit of the pupil pure white, just to give that sense of the light catching part of it. Because the eye's shiny as well, we want that change in tone between the dark and the light to be as extreme as possible. Very hard edge between the highlight and the shadow. And try and get it reasonably central. When you're shading the iris, begin thinking of it a little bit like a clock face and shade out from the center to the corners. Make it a good deal darker at the top under that eyelid. And obviously lighter as you come round into the direction that the highlight's coming from. Now generally, the light passes through the cornea on this side and refracts across to this other side and causes a secondary highlight on the opposite side of the iris. There tends as well to be a little bit of pigment gathering around the outside of the iris, so that's a little bit darker often. And maybe even just a little bit of shadow there, just inside the iris, as the light catches the inside of the aperture just before the pupil. From here on in, it's about observing the detail and the tonal differences, the subtle changes from the eye that you're looking at.